What's going on, everybody? My name is Monotui, your host for the GBA Season 5 Week 9 recap, and this week, unfortunately, Burke is no longer the host of these. I am now going to be taking over as the host, and we have a new co-host who is a new analyst for the GBA. He's appeared in previous seasons. Sly, please introduce yourself.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name's Slaro, and I'm going to be joining Monotui for the weekly recaps for the remainder of Season 5 of the GBA.
Yep, nothing bad happened with Burke. He is still within the GBA. He's still going to be working on a few projects along with some other people. But for the remainder of the season, your host for the weekly recap will be myself as well as Sly. So to start off the week, we're going to start with a forfeiture, actually. The match between the Boston Red Sox and Long Island Reggie Rockies was unable to be played. I believe Nips was unable to find a proper time to battle and was unfortunately forced to forfeit. So really not too much to go over here. This will result in a 3-0 victory to Nick and the Boston Red Sox. And for the most part, that's all we have to cover. That's all we got to go on. There are no stats to go over. Obviously, none of the Pokemon got any kills. So none of the stats change other than one extra win for Nick and one loss for Nips.
Alright, so we are going to move on to the next match, which also we don't have a whole lot to say about. It was taking place between the San Francisco Arcaniners and the Cincinnati Loudreds. Now, this is a match that did happen, but was not uploaded, so there's not much to comment on. But we can see the teams that were brought and the kills that happened. So, for the San Francisco Arcaniners, you can see Megalopunny, Scizor, Goodra, Gothitelle, Miltank, and Shiftry were brought, while the Cincinnati Loudreds decided to bring Landorus T, Weavile, Mega Manectric, Fortress, Gastrodon, and Dustoar. Clearly, Malbone, the Cincinnati Loudreds, did pick up the 2-0 victory, and it clearly seems that Mega Manectric was quite a huge issue, as it did pick up 3 kills. I'm assuming that there was probably a lot of volt switching and a lot of just pressure put on, as it doesn't look like Jordan had a way to stop that. That would be my biggest guess. Also, Shiftry picking up 2 kills, so really nice for George. But don't really have much to go on besides that.
Yep, we know that this is very irritating to you guys watching, to not have us be able to recap the events that went on in the match. At least in this case, we are able to give the score and the kills. I'm fairly certain that at least one of these two will have the match uploaded within a couple of days, but as of this recording, neither of them has uploaded their side. There's no replay code given, so we have no idea what went on. Kind of what you were saying, Sly, it is very clear why Mega Manectric got the 3 kills that it got. The only real thing George has to deal with it is the Goodra. Miltank, if it's specially defensive, can take some hits, but it can be worn down relatively easily. Goodra is the best switch-in that it has, but Goodra is taken down very easily by things like Weavile. So as soon as Goodra went down, it really looks like that the Manectric just had a field day with this team. It can Volt Switch out on the Gothitelle, so it can't be trapped because it is faster than the Scarf Gothitelle. So I can definitely see why this one went into Molbone's favor. Okay, so the next match we are going to go over is the match between the Detroit Steel Wings and the Atlanta Howluchas. On Crimson's side, we have his Mega Charizard X, Staraptor, Roserade, Electros, Infernape, and Crocodile, whereas Fizz and the Atlanta Howluchas brought their Venomoth, Garchomp, Tyranitar, Stoutland, Starmie, and Frostlass. So this is another match we don't have to cover too extensively because there really was not too much to go over. It was a very quick match. If any of you guys watch it, I believe it was 14 turns in total. Start off the match, Crimson leads with his Mega Charizard X, whereas Fizz leads with his Garchomp. Now, in Crimson's side, I believe he said he wasn't expecting an offensive Garchomp, or he wasn't expecting a Scarf Garchomp, but Garchomp naturally outspeeds Charizard X anyway, so I'm not 100% sure on what he was thinking when he left it in, when he has a bulky Crocodile to switch into it. So basically, Charizard X went down turn 1, which was pretty bad for Crimson. After that, we see Crimson goes out into his Electros to try and take out the Garchomp with an HP Ice, but Electros takes about half of its HP and is unable to kill with an HP Ice. This forces Crimson out into his defensive Crocodile. Not 100% sure why he didn't switch out to this in the first place. I'm guessing he thought he wanted the damage off on the Garchomp instead, which did make sense. Garchomp was a very big threat to his team this week. So a little bit after this, Venomoth is going to switch in on Crimson's Crocodile, and kind of an interesting switch because Venomoth is not very bulky, would not have appreciated taking a knockoff or an Earthquake, but is able to take a Toxic, obviously Venomoth being immune. And at this point, it's pretty much over for Crimson, unfortunately. He's going to go for a Sleep Powder on the incoming Electros, misses the first Sleep Powder, but is able to land a next one. At this point, he is then able to set up, I believe, a total of 2 Quiver Dances before Electros Volt switches out. And at this point, Venomoth actually just sweeps the rest of Crimson's team with Sludge Bomb. Again, with the tinted lens, it's going to be able to hit things like the crocodile basically neutrally with its sludge bomb, and it's going to easily knock out the crocodile with a +2 sludge bomb. And again, very short battle, very quick battle, pretty quick Venomoth sweep as well, and very cool to see Venomoth doing things.
So yeah, there's not a whole lot to say more about this match that you didn't already say. I think this is just one of the examples of Crimson planning for a lot of other threats and kind of probably overlooking Venomoth because it's not something you expect to sweep you, but you know, if you don't plan for Mon, sometimes they can probably sweep you, and I think that's just what happened here. So the next game that we're going to be talking about is going to be the Real Moril versus the Sacramento Sea Kings, which resulted in a 5-0 victory for the Real Moril. Mega Mogwai decided to bring Mega Altaria, Mamoswine, Zapdos, Dragalge, Emboar, and Seismitoad, and Hayden and the Sacramento Sea Kings decided to bring Mega Sableye, Clefable, Tornadus T, Exploud, Porygon 2, and Breloom. Hayden go ahead and he leads off with Breloom on Miguel's Seismitoad lead. Seismitoad just gets up rocks, and instead of going for the kill and going for a Bullet Siege, Hayden decides to just put the Seismitoad to sleep, and then, making a bit of an over-prediction, switches out into Clefable while Seismitoad just stays in, and Seismitoad just proceeds to kill the Clefable and get a lot of damage on the Exploud, which came in after that. Basically after that, Mega Altaria comes in, does end up taking out the Exploud, and then kind of just the entire bulk of the match is basically between Porygon 2 and Mega Altaria, with Mega Altaria basically setting up on it, not quite dying. Hayden was just trying to get some hacks to go his way. Didn't really happen, and Mega Altaria sets up enough to where it can sweep the entirety of Hayden's team, picking up a total of 5 kills, and basically just results in the second sweep for this week. And not much more to say all about that. Hayden didn't get a crit towards the end, but if he would have got a crit and then a pair of hacks, the game would have probably been longer, but didn't get that. Mega Altaria broke out of that and, again, was just able to sweep up the team, so.
Yeah, essentially all Hayden really had for Miguel's Mega Altaria was that Clefable. Again, I believe it was especially defensive Dragon Dance, Heal Bell, Roost, Mega Altaria, which is, I believe, the same set that he brought last time against Hayden. So I'm kind of surprised that Hayden didn't prep for that a little bit more. Again, his team is very weak to Mega Altaria, but he definitely should have kept his Clefable around longer, should have made sure that his Clefable did not take unnecessary damage. He saw that the Seismitoad was offensive, he knew that it wouldn't want to take a Life Orb super effective hit from the Seismitoad. He should have just stayed in with Breloom and dealt with it, because any switch into Breloom is kind of risky when Breloom does get things like Rock Tomb that hit things like the Zapdos and Altaria, which had not Mega Evolved at that point super effectively. So, well played and prepped by Miguel, but not super well played by Hayden. Okay, so the next match we are going to go over is the match between the Pittsburgh Paratataz and the San Francisco Giantes. Tup this week bringing his Celebi, Jellicent, Arcanine, that famous Fire, Water, Grass core, Kyurem, Thundurus, and Excadrill, whereas Geo is bringing his Mega Pinsir, Entei, Hippowdon, Amoonguss, Ditto, and Aromatisse. So this match leads off with Tup leading with the Celebi and Geo leading with Ditto. Knowing that his own Celebi cannot touch Arcanine, Tup goes out into the Arcanine on the Ditto's U-turn. At that point, Geo goes out into Entei, keeping up momentum for Geo. Goes for a Toxic on the Jellicent switch-in, which was very good planning on Geo's part, knowing that he can't hit the Jellicent too hard, even with a banded hit, using the Toxic to wear down the things that naturally wall it. After this, Geo then switches into his Ditto to try and take a Scald from the Jellicent. However, Tup did not actually bring Water Absorb on his Jellicent this week. He brought Curse Body. Definitely a good attempt by Geo, because that did make sense. His Jellicent would actually threaten Tup's Jellicent, especially with the Jellicent being Toxic. Could have gone for Hex and deal a lot of damage with it. However, Geo does not get burned with his Ditto. Tup here decides to double back into his Arcanine, which was a pretty good play. A little bit later on in the match, Tup hard switches his Thundurus in on the Ditto, which has transformed into Jellicent, takes a Scald, also is not burned, as Tup goes for the knockoff on the Ditto, or on the incoming Amoonguss, which is able to knock off its Assault Vest. However, a very interesting set of plays occurs next, as Arcanine switches into the Amoonguss, as the Amoonguss reveals Spore, which I thought was very curious. It worked for Geo, and I'm happy to see it work, because that was really cool. Bringing Spore on an AV Amoonguss expecting to get knocked off when Tup has literally only one knockoff user in the Thundurus was very clever, and it did happen to work out, so props to Geo for that working. After this, Geo goes out into his Entei, and Tup, making probably a pretty big mistake, I would consider, during the match, and stays in with his Arcanine, which gets knocked out by the Stone Edge. Tup, in his narration, said that he thought he could live the Stone Edge. He thought that the calc he did was accurate. Clearly not, because Stone Edge was easily able to one-shot the Arcanine. At this point, Tup, assuming that the Entei is banded, goes out into his Excadrill as Geo is forced to switch out into his Hippowdon. However, Tup makes a very nice double, going out into Kyurem, knowing that he can OHKO the Hippowdon regardless of its set with the Ice Beam. However, Geo does have the counter to this, being the Aromatisse. This Kyurem is not mixed with Iron Head, so he's unable to knock out the Aromatisse successfully, so Tup predicts Amoonguss to switch in, and so Tup goes out into his Celebi, another very good double on Tup's part. That's actually kind of surprising. Tup generally a little bit more of a safe player, but he was calling these switches and he was calling them correctly, so props to Tup. Geo is kind of forced out into his Entei, which is then forced to take a Life Orb Zen Headbutt from the Celebi, which deals about half to the Entei, which is very good because Entei is a pretty big threat to Tup's team, and being able to wear it down is very nice. Tup then, however, switches out into his Jellicent on the Entei as Geo pulls a pretty good double into Ditto once again. At this point, this play may be considered a misplay to some. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but Tup allows his Jellicent to get weakened by the Ditto's Hex in order to poison the Ditto. I kind of agree with this play because he needed to wear that Ditto down. It's the only guaranteed damage he's going to get on it, depending on what it can transform into, things like that. So I don't necessarily disagree with this play. I think it was fine. Tup at this point switches directly out into the Kyurem as Geo switches out into his Amoonguss. So again, Tup making the right switch. Not necessarily a prediction there, but Tup making a very good switch there. Kyurem, however, like I said earlier, does not have the Iron Head and is unable to 2-KO the Aromatisse, meaning that the Aromatisse is able to get off a Wish, and instead of just going for the Protect and letting the Aromatisse get its health back, Geo passes this Wish out into the Entei, which is very bad for Tup because, like I said earlier, Entei is a very big threat to Tup's team, especially with the weakened Jellicent now. So, like I said, at this point, Tup goes out into his Jellicent in order to sack it to the Sacred Fire, and the only thing Tup can really do at this point is go out into his Kyurem and hit it with an Earth Power, but because the Entei was wished back to full health, and because there were no rocks on the side of the field, Earth Power is unable to kill, and is forced to take a very powerful Sacred Fire, but thankfully does not get burned. At this point, Kyurem is going to go for another Earth Power, hitting the incoming Amoonguss. Tup knows he cannot do a KO. Hard switches out into Celebi, which takes the Sludge Bomb and then knocks out the Amoonguss with the Zen Headbutt. Next up, I'm going to cover a pretty crucial part in the match. Tup is in with his Thundurus, as I believe Geo's in with his Mega Pinsir. Geo knows he cannot let his Pinsir get paralyzed, so Geo then goes out into his Ditto, which then transforms into the Thundurus to take the T-Wave, meaning that Geo can go for a free knockoff, able to knock off the Kyurem, bringing it down into quick attack range. Kyurem is able to knock out the Ditto because it can take 2 knockoffs, but at this point Pinsir can come in and just revenge kill it. Tup's only real chance is to somehow bluff the Scarf well enough, which I don't think at that point was possible. Tup sets up the rocks on Pinsir's switch out, which was actually a pretty good play, but kind of futile at this point. Pinsir did clean up the rest of his team. So at this point, Geo is going to sack off his Aromatisse to the Excadrill, but Pinsir is going to be able to come in and clean up the rest of the game, and that's going to be a 3-0 win for the Giantes.
Yeah, this was a pretty good game. Obviously Geo and the Giantes with Mega Pinsir Entei, that's just a lot of offensive power, and basically when you have something like Mega Pinsir, Geo knows that he just needs to get things within quick attack range, and then he can win the game from there. He knew what he had to do that, and he did it. So props to him.
Definitely. Again, like I said earlier, Tup really needed that Arcanine healthy in order to take on things like the Pinsir, able to switch into Entei's Sacred Fire, predicting around Stone Edges. So again, unfortunate that he did lose the Arcanine so early, but again, like I said, props to Geo for bringing an Assault Vest and Amoonguss with Spore, because even though that's definitely something I would never do, I think a lot of people would never do that, it worked out, and I can't fault them for it.
So we're going to move on to the next game, which was the Arizona Deoxys versus the Milwaukee Sawsbucks. Gubs bringing Mega Alakazam, Cofagrigus, Gigalith, Snorlax, Tentacruel, and Thundurus T. And Steve bringing Mega Gardevoir, Mesprit, Baradon Wash, Heatran, Conkeldurr, and Haxorus. So to start the match, Gubs leads off with Gigalith, and Steve leads off with Baradon Wash. And Steve just wants to burn the Gigalith, so he does so with the Will-O-Wisp while Gubs sets up rocks. And Gubbs goes into Snorlax as Steve fires off a Hydro Pump, and then he also burns the Snorlax because he doesn't want to deal with the cursed Snorlax. Even though it might have rest, it's still good for him to try and waste turns so he can get some momentum on his side. But Gubbs then goes into Thundurus on Volt Switch, preventing the Rotom Wash from being able to Volt Switch on it. Then Gubbs sets up the Nasty Plot while Steve switches out into Mesprit, but the Ice Beam is unable to kill. But it's in range to die from Conkeldur's Mach Punch. Gubbs goes into Pythagoras to save Thundurus for just a little bit later, and then Gubbs pulls a double into Tentacruel as Steve switches into Heatran. Steve stays in and tanks the Scald because Heatran can tank Scalds from Tentacruel all day, and getting off an Earth Power on Tentacruel, just getting off some damage. Also is able to set up Rocks, which is kind of forcing Gubbs to spin, which gives Steve a free switch into the Mega Gardevoir. And then Mega Gardevoir forces out Tentacruel and forces Gubbs to sack off the Gigalith. Steve then sacks Heatran and lets Thundurus die to Life Orb, which was a really good play. And then we get to the turning part of the match where Steve goes into Conkeldurr with the sole purpose of being able to live a Psychic from a Mega Alakazam and taking it out with Knockoff, or a mixture of Knockoff plus Mach Punch. However, Steve's luck continues to be very little this season as Mega Alakazam gets a crit Psychic and Conkeldurr goes down. And basically his counter to Mega Alakazam goes down to the Mega Alakazam, which is very unfortunate. But he has a backup plan. He's going to go into Haxorus and has a very good chance to live and can kill with either an Earthquake or Dragon Claw Outrage. I forget what move he was going for, but it doesn't matter because the Mega Alakazam gets the highest roll possible, taking out the Haxorus and basically ruining any chance that Steve had of winning this game, which is really unfortunate because I feel like he was playing really well up to this point. But the rest of Steve's team basically is just unable to deal with the Mega Alakazam. And the Arizona Deoxys finish with a 2-0 victory, with Mega Alakazam picking up 4 kills. This would have been possibly even closer and a way more different match if the Mega Alakazam was gone. It's interesting to see how that would have turned out, but Pokemon, it's the game we play, and things like this happen sometimes, and unfortunately it seems to happen to Steve more often than the average person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, this match... we've made comments about Steve's performance in the past. This match, Steve played absolutely fine. I remember during the match he made pretty smart plays, such as setting up Stealth Rocks with his Heatran, baiting the Rapid Spin from Tentacruel. That way he got a free switch out into his Mega Gardevoir. His prep was not over the top. It was very solid. He had the moves to knock out the things that he had the Resist Berry for, which was a mistake in his previous match. He really did, I think, play this one smart. He wasn't too aggressive, was not too safe. I mean, he did play relatively safe, but playing safe was the way he should have played because it would have worked out had that crit not happened. And at that point, even if though Conkeldurr would have been low after the Psychic, it still had the Mach Punch, it still outsped the Snorlax. It would have been able to deal a lot of damage to Gubbs' team, and the combination of Conkeldurr plus Haxorus would have easily knocked out the rest of Gubbs' team. Next up, we are going to cover the match between the Borussia Donphan and the St. Louis Rampardos. The Borussia Donphan, of course, being coached by Lars, the St. Louis Rampardos being coached by Dan. Lars this week bringing his Landorus Incarnate, Mega Absol, Druddigon, Delphox, Tangrowth, and Crobat, whereas Dan is bringing his Salamence, Mega Aggron, Heracross, Victini, Uxie, and Blastoise. Turn 1, we have Lars leading with his Crobat and Dan leading with the Salamence, and turn 1, Lars makes a bit of an overprediction and loses his Crobat to the Life Orb Draco Meteor from Salamence. Lars was kind of, I think, overthinking this a little bit. He was expecting Dan to go for maybe something like a T-Wave, it being like a random bulky T-Wave set, but he was not, so he taunts the Salamence and dives immediately after to the Draco Meteor. But after that, Lars does make a very good play, predicting Dan's Aggron to come in, and goes for the EQ with his Hanger, dealing a little bit over half to the Aggron that did not previously Mega Evolve yet. After that, Dan does Mega Evolve and goes for the Toxic on the incoming Druddigon, and unfortunately misses. Now, this was not huge, but this was pretty important, because wearing down that Druddigon would have been very helpful, considering how annoying it was later on in the match. Lars, however, does take this opportunity to set up his Rocks on the incoming Blastoise, who is now forced to Rapid Spin at some point. Blastoise then able to land a Toxic on the incoming Tangrowth, wearing that down, which is very important because Tangrowth is probably the only switch-in Lars has to the Salamence. It is especially defensive. Assault Vest Tangrowth can take a Draco Meteor and can take another one at -2. His only switch into Life Orb Draco at this point. Lars afterwards then pulls a very nice double into Drudagon as Dan goes out into his Mega Aggron, and Drudagon was able to taunt the Aggron before it was able to rest, meaning that Aggron will have to rest at a later time and it really cannot do much to the Drudagon. Lars then continued to using his Drudagon very well, Dragon Tails the Blastoise out on its switch-in, sending it out into Uxie. Dan then tries to yawn something on Lars' team, however, Lars goes out into his Tangrowth, which is already poisoned, meaning that it cannot be put to sleep. Then once again, Lars pulling another good double, going back out into Drudagon as Uxie goes for U-turn, dealing it a lot of rough skin and rocky helmet damage. At this point, however, Dan is able to gain a little bit of momentum because Salamence is going to get a free switch in, and again, Lars' only switch in to a Life Orb Draco Meteor is the AV Tangrowth. However, Tangrowth is crit on the switch in. By the way, I am going by Dan's perspective at the moment. I will reference a couple things that happened differently in Lars' perspective, which was a recreation. Tangrowth was crit on the switch in, and it is unable to take another hit. So Lars sees his only potential switch into a -2 Draco Meteor being his Delphox. However, Dan does heal up his Salamence going for the Roost, which was a very good play, making sure that the biggest threat to Lars' team remained healthy. Lars at this point cannot knock out the Salamence with Dazzling Gleam, so he is forced back out into Tangrowth, and at this point, Lars kind of has to sack his Tangrowth because he doesn't really have a switch into Draco Meteor like I mentioned earlier. However, this is a pretty key point in the match. Lars actually timed out at this point. Lars had the HP Ice on the Tangrowth, but because he was not able to click the move in time, Lars' Tangrowth went for the Giga Drain on the Salamence, meaning that it was forced to take a hit and then die to Toxic. So what could have been a large chunk of damage on the Salamence ended up in very little. We have Lars Delphox in, goes for the Dazzling Gleam, but Dan is able to switch into his Victini, which easily tanks the Dazzling Gleam. We are seeing another relatively bulky Victini this week. Now, at this point, Lars makes his second over prediction of the game and goes for a second Dazzling Gleam, as Victini stays in and deals a lot of damage to it from Recreate. At this point, Lars was expecting a switch from Dan, but Dan, being very difficult to predict, did not make the switch, and Lars was unfortunately punished because so. Also, another kind of detriment to Lars for going for the second Dazzling Gleam as Victini stayed in is that he revealed that his own Delphox was Scarf, which is unfortunate because he did reveal his set to Dan. Now, at this point, Dan is expecting him to switch out into the Drudagon, so he does go out into the Aggron, as Lars does pull the switch into Drudagon. Lars pulls a very nice offensive switch into his Landorus Incarnate as the Aggron goes for rest, and this is the start of Dan's downfall. Lars, at this point, knowing that the Aggron is not going to stay in because it is asleep and he does not want to get damaged with the Earth Power, goes out into his Uxie, which, even though it has the Colbur Berry, is going to get knocked out by two knockoffs, which Lars does go for, and the Uxie goes down, meaning that his only real switch into the Landorus is now gone. Dan at this point then goes out into his Heracross because he needed to get off damage on the Landorus, and it's the only thing that can really take a hit at this point. So Lars goes out into Drudagon on the knockoff, gets enough Rocky Helmet and Rough Skin damage before it goes down to make sure that he can knock it out with the Landorus. So at this point, Lars has basically won with Landorus as long as he can get a Rock Polish up. A little bit later on in the match, Lars realizes that it is totally fine to sack off his Drudagon to Salamance's Draco Meteor. So he does so, and then goes out into his Landorus. Dan tries to sack off his Heracross to get something in to revenge kill the Landorus. However, Landorus does go for the Rock Polish, and at this point, it is over for Dan. If you were watching Dan's perspective, you know at this point the game disconnected, but it was very clear who the winner was in that point. Lars easily would have swept the rest of Dan's team, and this is shown off by a recreation done by Lars with Lars' perspective. So that is going to be the end of that match and a 3-0 win for the Baradon fan.
Yeah, this is a really fantastic match. Dan does usually what Dan does, getting into his opponent's head turn one. A bit of a odd lead from Lars' perspective. Didn't really expect a Salamence lead, and so he had no idea what it did, and so that really threw him off. But Lars is really able to pull it back with just a lot of really good double switches and a lot of just preventing Aggron to rest and just using Drudagon really well. And also, I think without really trying to, Dan was thinking that the Landorus was Scarf and kind of played around the end of the match as if it was. Not sure that even if he didn't guess that it was Scarf, if it would have played out too much differently, because Dan still didn't really have anything on his team to stop it. But that was also, a thing that happened. He, thought that the Landorus was Scarfed, and then it wasn't, kind of caught him off guard, which I don't think Lars tried to do, but it still paid off really, really well.
Yes, this was a strategy that Lar tried to do the last time these two faced off, but was unable to. Dan's really only chance of winning there was going for the Draco Meteor with Salamence as Landorus went for a Rock Polish and then critting it, knocking it out, which, again, slim chance, and there's no way Dan could have known that that was his best play. His best play was what he did, but at that point it was too late for him.
So now we're going to move on to the last match of the week, which was the New Orleans Pelipers versus the New York Yankees. John bringing Lantern, Hydreigon, Raikou, Donphan, Reuniclus, and Mega Scizor, and Shady bringing Sharpedo, Mismagius, Milotic, Mega Venusaur, Jirachi, and Rhyperior. Alright, so John leads the Donphan as Shady predicts this and leads Venusaur. John really wanted to get off rocks, was unable to, was scared out by the Venusaur, and immediately switches out into Reuniclus. Shady predicts that and goes for the knockoff, and Reuniclus's Assault Vest is immediately gone from the match. But Shady then pulls a risky switch into Sharpedo. John almost went for Energy Ball, decided not to, went for the safe Shadow Ball, and didn't quite work out for him. I think he was trying to catch the Jirachi. I think he was trying to catch the Jirachi on the switch in. So, but then Shady has Crunch this time on the Sharpedo, so that way he can do a lot of damage to the Reuniclus. But John switches into the Lantern to take the hit and is able to do so. John then decides to do some scouting and decides to see if Sharpedo also has Earthquake and goes into Hydreigon, but Shady goes into Milotic. So then John just decides to U-turn on the Milotic and go right back into Lantern. Then Shady decides to switch into Jirachi on Lantern's Scald, and the Jirachi gets burned, basically crippling it and basically turning it useless for the remainder of the match. That's only half true, but we'll get to that later. So then Shady just decides to switch out into Mismagius on Donphan, which was a pretty interesting switch. And then at this point, John basically has to decide whether he wants to get up rocks or whether he wants to just take out the Mismagius. Well, he decides to just go for the knockoff, take out Mismagius, take some Energy Ball damage. He was at full health, so regardless of anything, he would live with Sturdy. Decided to just go for the kill and takes him out, but does not able to get up rocks as Shady then goes into Sharpedo and scares out the Donphan. John just trying to save it and possibly get up rocks later. Shady then just Toxics Lantern, and Lantern paralyzes Milotic, so they're just trading status there. But John is then able to Heal Bell, which he brought on the Lantern, as Venusaur switches in, and then Shady reveals Swords Dance Venusaur, which definitely caught a lot of people off guard, caught John off guard, and he went forward on Reuniclus. John was over-predicting. We went for an Energy Ball, trying to catch, Sharpedo to come back in like it did before. Shady just basically predicts this again and just gets up to +4 with Venusaur, which is really, really scary. But John is able to switch into Mega Scizor, which does live a knockoff, and then lives in EQ after Mega Evolving, so Scizor proving to be pretty bulky there. Shady then decides that this time he's just going to save his Venusaur. He'll try it again later, and he goes into Rhyperior as Raikou is there to force it out, as Raikou has Extra Sensory. And then John decides that this is the time to sack his Mega Scizor, which had very low health, but he does get some damage off on the Rhyperior through a crit knockoff. But Shady is able to get Stealth Rocks up with the Rhyperior, and they're on John's side to stay. Then John then revenges Rhyperior with a Draco Meteor from Hydreigon, realizing that Hydreigon is really going to put a lot of pressure on Shady's team. Shady then goes into Jirachi, while John goes into Raikou to try and set up, because it's a burned Jirachi, figures he can't do anything to him. But then Shady goes for the Healing Wish, which does mean that Jirachi does play an important role in this match, as Mega Venusaur is then able to get back up to full health, even though it was brought down pretty low earlier in the match, which is pretty bad for John, meaning that Shady can try and set up Swords Dances again, which it does try and do, but this time John just decides to keep attacking with Reuniclus, trying to get as much damage off as possible, which he does, but the Mega Venusaur does get up Swords Dance, takes out the Reuniclus. Then there's basically a showdown between Raikou and Mega Venusaur, as John has the Sub-Calm Mind Raikou, and Shady has the Swords Dance and Synthesis for Mega Venusaur. Basically, they're both not really taking each other out, but John almost takes out the Mega Venusaur, as he does get a crit, but he did get really close to killing it, and it didn't quite do that. So after this showdown, Mega Venusaur is victorious. Raikou does go down, and then John goes out into Hydreigon, again realizing that it can hit the rest of Shady's team for a lot of damage. So Shady goes for knock off one Hydreigon to knock off whatever its item is, but then I believe Hydreigon is able to take out the Mega Venusaur. Sharpedo then comes in, and as John switches into Lantern, which Sharpedo can't kill, then Lantern does kill the Sharpedo with the Volt Switch, and then all Shady has left is the Milotic. John at first tries to kind of do some pair flinches with Dark Pulse, and Milotic was already paralyzed from earlier, but then didn't want to just kind of flinch him to death. Tries to take out the Milotic with a Draco Meteor, but misses by 1 HP. Was 1 HP short of taking him out. Milotic's able to recover, so at this point John just goes back into Lantern to try and so that way he can restore the special attack drop from the Draco Meteor. Sacks off Lantern, and John's able to come in and is able to go for Draco Meteor to actually take out Milotic this time for a very, very close 1-0 victory for the New Orleans Pelipers. So that was a really, really intense, really close game. It was anyone's game right down to the very end, but John was able to come up with the victory in the end there.
Yes, like you said, this was a very, very close game. I am going to point out, I think, two kind of crucial points in the match, maybe two misplays on Shady's part. Not that they ended up being enormous, but I believe John was in on his Donphan, and Shady had a free switch into whatever he wanted, and he decided to go out into the Mismagius. Mismagius was carrying the Energy Ball to hit the Donphan, but with Donphan's 30, it wasn't able to do anything, especially Shady did have his Melodic that he could have gone into that could have scalded it, taken a hit, done whatever he needed to do. I can understand if Shady was trying to prevent the Donphan from going for rocks, like he was forcing the Donphan to stay in, go for the knockoff, killing it, but then making Donphan very easily revengeable. A little bit later on, this is not so much as a mistake, but maybe a little bit of a nitpick. Hydreigon versus Venusaur. Hydreigon actually missed a Draco Meteor that would have knocked out the Venusaur, but instead of going for the Synthesis, Shady decided to go for the knockoff to get damage off on the Hydreigon. Again, there's no way he should have predicted the miss, there's no way he should have expected anything to not kill, but in my opinion, his best play was there because he was losing Venusaur almost regardless. He couldn't have done anything unless what happened. His best play there, I think, would have been to recover up because, again, like I said, on the very slim off chance that John is unable to kill it for whatever reason, he wants that Venusaur healthy because it did deal with the rest of John's team pretty nicely. So with that being said, we have covered all of this week's matches that we could cover. Now we are going to move on to the current MVP race. So starting off at number 1, we have Mega Pinsir of the San Francisco Giants, coached by Gio, of course, with 16 kills, 2 deaths, and a plus 14 differential. Mega Pinsir now moving its way up on the MVP ladder and is now at the top. Now in second place, for the first time in a very long time, we have Manaphy, coached by Nick of the Boston Red Sox, with 16 kills, 7 deaths, and a plus 9 differential. And after that, we have Mega Lopunny, coached by George of the San Francisco Arcaniners, with 15 kills, 3 deaths, and a plus 12 differential. So these top 3, I believe, are all in new spots this time, which was very interesting. Manaphy was at number 1 for a while, like I said. Mega Lopunny was a little bit lower, but now these 3 are all in the current top 3.
So the rest of the list is shaking out to look like Landorus Incarnate is 4th place for the Borussia Donphan and his coach Lars with 14 kills and 3 deaths. 5th place there's Entei for the Giants, of course coached by Gio, with 12 kills and 5 deaths, giving Gio 2 Mons in the top 5 of the MVP race. Salamence is in 6th place for the Rampardos and their coach Dan with 12 kills and 7 deaths for a plus 5 differential. 7th, Mega Absol for the Borussia Donphan again, and their coach Lars, 11 kills, 4 deaths, with plus 7 differential. 8th place is Diggersby for the Reggie Rockies and their coach Nips, 8 kills, 3 deaths for a plus 5 differential. And tied for 8th place is another Reggie Rockies member, the Feraligator, also coached by Nips, 8 kills, 3 deaths for a plus 5 differential. And then 10th place, there's Garchomp for the Haluchas and their coach Fizz with 8 kills, 4 deaths for a plus 4 differential.
Yes, that is correct. Also tied with Garchomp, but is currently not on the list because of Garchomp's name being first in alphabetical order. We have Reuniclus of the New Orleans Pelipers, coached by John, also with 8 kills, 4 deaths, and a +4 differential, same as Garchomp. Okay, so moving on to the league standings. So to start off with the red division, we have the Atlanta Howluchas in first place with 8 wins, 1 loss, and a +20 differential. In second place, we have the New Orleans Pelipers with 6 wins, 3 losses, and a +5 differential, still pretty close to Fizz. Then we have the New York Yankees with 3 wins, 6 losses, and a -7 differential. And in last place, we have the Detroit Steel Wings with 2 wins, 7 losses, and a -19 differential.
Alright, and on to the blue division, the closest division in the GBA. In first place is the Baradon fan with 6 wins, 3 losses, and a +12 differential. Very closely followed by Dan the St. Louis Rampardos with also 6 wins, 3 losses, but a +11 differential. Then right behind them, the San Francisco Giants with 5 wins, 4 losses, and a +3 differential. And coming in at the tail end of the division is the Pittsburgh Piratas with 4 wins and 5 losses and a -5 differential.
So moving on to the Johto Conference, we have in the gold division, the Boston Red Sox, coached by Nick, with 6 wins, 3 losses, and a +11 differential. Following him, we have Nips and the Long Island Reggie Rockies with 3 wins, 6 losses, and a -9 differential. Below him, we have Gubs and the Arizona Deoxys with 3 wins, 6 losses, and a -12 differential. And then at the very bottom, we have the Milwaukee Sawsbucks at 1 win, 8 losses, and a -15 differential.
Alright, and then moving into the silver division, we have the RaMel in first place with 7 wins, 2 losses, and a +19 differential. Then we have the San Francisco Arcaniners also with a 7 wins and 2 losses record with a +13 differential. Followed then by the Cincinnati Loudreds with 3 wins, 6 losses, and a -3 differential. And then finally the Sacramento Sea Kings with 2 wins, 7 losses, and a -23 differential.
So finishing up with that, we are now moving on to the schedule for next week. The first match we're going to cover, we have the Milwaukee Sawsbucks going up against the San Francisco Arcaniners. This one, although I would like to give it to Steve because he did impress me with his play last week and he did get a very unfortunate loss, a loss that likely should have been a win, I am going to give this one to George. Like I said last week, it is, in my opinion, that George is one of the best players in this league, and I don't see too many people being able to beat him. However, George has previously lost to a person relatively near the bottom, being the Detroit Steel Wings, so it is definitely not impossible that Steve is able to pull away with a win here.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm a big fan of George. I think he also is one of the best players, and I just don't think that he's going to want to take 2 losses in a row, especially being so close to the top of his division. I think he's really gonna want to fight for it, and isn't going to let Steve take him over this match. Right, and then the next match is the Atlanta Howluchas versus the St. Louis Rampardos, which I'm really looking forward to. This is 2 of the top players in the GBA right now. Dan is coming off of a loss, and Fizz is coming off of a 6-0 sweep. So it's very interesting, coming from 2 different places, and it's really a toss-up as to who I would think would win. I think I will probably pick Dan just because I don't see Dan losing 2 matches in a row. I think he's going to bounce back and continue to fight because he also has a division title to fight for as well. And I think he's going to plan really hard, and I think he's going to come up with a win. But I think it's going to be a very close game.
For this one, I'm going to give this one to Fizz and the Atlanta Howluchas. I am still on the Fizz train. Fizz has been doing absolutely incredibly this season. His team prep that he and his front office that have been able to come up with has been excellent. And as long as he is able to not get flustered by Dan's inability to be predicted, I think he is going to pull away with a win here. Next up, we have the match between Shady and the New York Yankees and Lars of the Borussia Donphan. I am going to give this one to Lars. Shady has impressing me pretty heavily with last week's performance, despite a couple of misplays. I am going to give this one to Lars. He has been on fire for most of the season with occasional slip-ups. I don't think this is going to be another slip-up. I think he is going to play well, and I think he is going to beat the New York Yankees. I think Lars is going to come out on top because of his coaching abilities and the fact that his team matches up pretty well, in my opinion, to Shady's.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting team matchup. I think this is actually going to be another really close game. I don't think this is super in Lars's favor, but I will also hand this one to Lars. He's another one. He is right there with Dan with the division lead right there. So he's really got to fight for it, and I think he's going to. And I think he's going to plan really hard. But I think Shady's going to be a really tough opponent for him. But interested to see how that one goes. Then the next match we have the Detroit Steel Wings going up against the San Francisco Giants, and this one, I mean, another interesting match, but I do think that the San Francisco Giants can pull this one off. They've been playing really well. I don't really expect that to change. Crimson is, he does have a good team, and he does have the ability to win, but I don't see Gio losing right now. He's kind of been a little bit on a roll, and I think he's just going to keep that up.
Yes, I am going to agree. I am going to give this one to Gio. Like you said, he's been on a roll recently. I have a feeling Crimson is going to come back into this match with a passion to win. Being able to win 2 matches in a row and then losing as badly as he did, I do think he is determined to win. So if he can, full respect to him, but I am going to give this one to the Giants. Moving on, we have the match between Gubbs and the Arizona Deoxys and Hayden of the Sacramento Sea Kings. This is a kind of a tough one for me to call, but I'm going to give this one based solely off Gubbs' prep. Although his matches have not turned out so well and his playing has been a little bit subpar than what we're used to from Gubbs, I think his prep is still on point. Whereas with Hayden, neither his prep nor play has been all that impressive to me somewhat recently, so I am going to give a narrow edge to Gubbs.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you for similar reasons. Also, it just seems by Hayden's own admissions that it just doesn't seem like he's putting as much effort into his matches, so I think effort really translates into results, and Gubbs' team building has been pretty good, so I'll give a slight edge to Gubbs, but I think either one really could win, so we'll just have to see how that turns out. And then the next match we have is the Boston Red Sox taking on the Real Madrid. Another really, really interesting match that's going to be really fun to watch. But I do have to give the slight edge to Miguel and the Real Madrid. I've never been one to pick against them because 9 times out of 10 he wins, so I just don't really pick against the defending champion, and I've given no reason to this week. So
this is an interesting one for me. Normally I would go with Miguel for pretty much the same reasons you would, but I'm actually going to give this one to Nick of the Boston Red Sox. Nick is, not that Miguel is not, because Miguel is very creative with the sets, but Nick can be very creative with the sets that he comes up with. For example, Acupressure Drapion was absolutely brilliant. He finds move sets in his Pokemon that are able to set up on his opposing Pokemon normally that you would not be able to see in standard play. I think he's going to be able to catch Miguel off guard enough to the point where he'll be able to beat him. With that being said, the next match we're going to go over is the match between the New Orleans Pelipers and the Pittsburgh Piratas. I'm going to give this one to John of the New Orleans Pelipers. Playing the way he did last week, being able to come back from a very dangerous situation, very much impressed me, and I am going to give him the win over Tup. Tup not playing terribly in his last match, but I do think that John's coaching abilities have impressed me a little bit more than Tup's recently, and I do think John has a little bit of a better team matchup. Not by too much, but I do think John is going to pull away with a win here.
Yeah, again, I'm going to have to agree with you once more because I do think that John is going to win this. His recent matches have been incredible. He's made some really, really incredible plays against his opponent, and almost coming up with the win against George 2 weeks ago, and then coming up with the win this past week. I don't think that Tup is going to be able to keep up with that, being usually a safe player, and even when he does try to make double switches, I just think John's going to have the upper hand in this matchup. So yeah, I'm going to give that one to John also. And then the last match for the week is Nips and the Long Island Reggie Rockies versus Mulvone and the Cincinnati Loudreds, which is a pretty interesting matchup as they both surprisingly have playoff implications, really kind of riding on this match. But I do think that Mulvone is actually going to pull out this one. Mulvone has actually started to catch a little bit of fire, beating George this past week. Very impressive. I think Mulvone is used to his team and is kind of going on to a run that he went on for basically all of last season. I think he's really starting to do that this season, really understanding his team and really working with it, and I think it's going to be really tough to beat him. I think he's playing better than what his record indicates.
Yes, this is kind of a tough one for me to call as well. This could turn into a match of offense versus defense. Of course, Nips having that Mega Slowbro Champsy core, which could be very problematic for Mulvone. But if Mulvone is able to wear down the Chansey well enough, maybe being able to Volt Switch out with Mega Man Trick, I do think he is going to pull out a win here. It could be tough for him because Nips' offense still is very, very scary. He could potentially have a Tailwind on his Whimsicott to make things like Diggersby outspeed everything, which is a very big threat to Mulvone's team. But I'm going to give the narrow edge to Mulvone. But again, Nips definitely has opportunities to win here, and I can definitely see him doing so. And so with that, we are going to wrap up the GBA Season 5 Week 9 weekly recap. Thank you guys for joining us. My name is Monotui.
My name is Slyro.
And we will see you guys in the next episode. Feel free to leave your comments about what you thought about the episode in the comment section below. Leave us your thoughts. Leave any constructive criticisms you may have. Again, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.